депутатов заключается в принятии справедливых законов, а не в раздаче бесполезных подарков. Все за меценаты не вспомнят вас, когда будут принимать очередной антинародный закон.
19 сентября приди и выбери справедливую Россию за правду.
Да, в принципе, без разницы.
Всем привет, вы на канале The меня зовут Володя, и сегодня я вам расскажу самые свежие и горячие новости из мира техники. Почему, к примеру, весь мир ополчился против компании Apple? Каким образом Xiaomi сумели сбросить Apple с их пригретого места? И обязательно досматривайте это видео до конца, чтобы узнать, почему выход MIUI 13 поменяет вообще все, что вы знали о смартфонах Xiaomi. А теперь давайте не терять времени зря, подписка, если не подписаны, лайк, Новости бывают двух типов. Это правдивые новости и те, которые показывают по телевизору. Слава Ютубу, мы выходим на просторах интернета, поэтому я расскажу сегодня о самых интересных новостях из мира гаджетов. Мы уже с вами привыкли к потоку новостей из Китая, но тут настоящая информационная бомба из страны восходящего солнца. Кстати, это единственная бомба, которая не несет никакого вреда человечеству. А можно даже сказать наоборот. Японцы из Sony успешно запустили пятый PlayStation, а их земляки, аналитики из компании Formalhaut Techno Solutions совместно с Nikkei пошли с голыми руками, можно сказать, на самого босса и разложили на молекулы новые iPhone. Ну, то есть просчитали себестоимость iPhone 12 и 12 Pro. Попробуйте угадать, сколько вышло. Значит так, стандартная версия яблочного флагмана обходится компании в $373 за штуку, а версия Pro в $406. Соответственно, даже в Америке на своих Apple наваливает около 100%. Мой оператор Русик недавно утюг брал в кредит в банке. Так и то нацена была меньше. Оттуда от 300 до 1500 баксов. Да, друзья, вот она, понимаете, вот она, цена нарисованного яблочка на задней крышке. Люд, закрой, пожалуйста, окно, потому что после этой новости маты вот этих людей, которые купили 12 iPhone, будут мешать нам снимать программу, реально. Но самое интересное то, что находится внутри самого аппарата. Многие из вас, кстати, будут удивлены. Без любого зазрения совести вот эти фермеры яблочные из Купертино ставят запчасти прямых конкурентов. Как говорится, держи конкурента близко, а запчасти еще ближе. Если вы долго не могли определиться, выбирали между Samsung, Sony и Apple, и все-таки в итоге выбрали последний, то не переживайте. Ведь в iPhone есть частичка от каждого из этих брендов. А именно флеш-память от Samsung и CMOS-сенсоры от Sony. Кстати, по сравнению с предыдущими моделями, вместимость батареи уменьшилась на 10%. Говорят, чтобы втиснуть как можно больше новых компонентов под капот свежих айфонов. Знаете, мне кажется, что в офисе Apple вообще табу на два словосочетания. Первое – это аккумулятор побольше, и второе – это цена подешевле. Основной упор вот такой фаршировки – это подготовка к переходу на 5G. А большая батарея, мол, с каждым годом нужна все меньше, ведь комплектующие становятся все более экономными. Ага. Мне теперь что? Для того, чтобы хранить вот эти все пауэрбанки для техники Apple, придется свою однушку на двушку поменять, да? А потом, смотри, уже и трошка надо будет, а тут еще на тебе и беда пришла. И вообще же откуда не ждали, понимаете, в чем дело? От софта. После обновления от Apple аккумулятор почему-то начинает садиться быстрее. Теперь уже все, друзья, у новых обладателей iPhone ноги в туалете не иметь не будут. Посидел 5 минут и обратно к розеточке заряжаться. А еще говорят, что Apple не заботится о своих клиентах. Как вам нравится? Так вот вам, это же забота о здоровье на лицо. Итак, самая дорогая деталь в новых iPhone это OLED-экран за $70. При этом процессор A14 Bionic обходится производителю в 40 баксов. И на этом сегодняшние новости про Apple не заканчиваются, потому что в яблочном саду сейчас урожайный период на события. Специалисты аналитической компании Gartner прикинули, что там у нас случилось с рынком смартфонов в третьем квартале 2020 года.
О, кайфки. О, рейтинги. Ура, ура.
Да когда я понимаю, да. Не стесняюсь, мешаю, да.
Ну, Морально готовишься. Да, ну поступление просто. Ну, он себе думает, да. Но дело не в этом, понимаешь, там надо будет работать пианюгой. Да, то есть, да. Ну, потому что я так сказал. Нахера тебе переезжать туда. Если у тебя ни композитор, ни писатель, как бы, да, то есть, как бы, ты здесь можешь это сделать, да, начать по интернету, а туда приехать уже человек, да, то есть, чтобы там уже не лохом быть, как бы, и не пиццерию разносить, как бы, да, а может и куда-то наняться уже, как бы, да, параллельно, да, ну, вот я понял, да, важный софт, говорит, Я тоже так думаю, да. Не в обиду, конечно, но как бы мужская тема такая, что если, да, да, типа того, да. Ну да, ну как вино мужики-то, только не пища. Да. Это уже не здесь, когда, понимаете, просто женщина, детородная она должна быть, понимаешь, да, типа беречь ее, да, нимфы с сигаретами, как бы, да, понимаешь, ну, не знаю, понимаешь, да, красоту хотя бы береги свою, как вот так вот, красота, она как раз папироса должна быть, да, ну ладно, кто когда, ну ладно, морально какую-нибудь, да, да, нежность какую-нибудь, не знаю, да, что-нибудь, да. Что-нибудь женское, короче, не знаю. Одинокие просто жизнь. Наверное, макияж. Что-то я ничего не посчитал. Ну да. Вот это есть. Так, это что, правее? Сильный come sopra. Нет, подожди-ка. Так это вот это. Ну, это типа должен играть. Никто не будет обязать. Да, печься надо. Всегда можно хорошо, да? Меньше делать, больше беременеть, правильно? Больше любви пошел, да? Нежности, да? Ладно, шутка смешная. Производство. понял? Ладно. Правильно, знаешь, говорит. Это тоже интересно. Но все-таки никто не отменяет это. Переживать соболет. Что это я? Брат, нужно играть. А нет, нет, все правильно. А, ну да. И не указано. Нет, без всяких намеков, да. Ну, наверное, да. Да, охуенно. Эх, не дожидайся уже, здесь уже все. Лежи уже, нормально. Да, да, понимаю, собственно. Да. Малыш у меня. Мусор. Ну, да, значит, другую играть. Да. Просто не время сейчас, ну да, не свое. Вот это вот, вот это она и красивая, наоборот, ну и дура, лучше тебя пусть ищут. Я тебе точно говорю. Тебя должны найти, неважно какой кривой, горбатый, урод, там, неважно. Да. Ну, наверное. Да, это хорошо, понимаешь? Да. Это вот да, понимаешь? Я понял, что да. Так вот это и говорит нам, да, вот как бы, любви, да. Хорошо, да. Не знаю, если О, ладно. Гудер. Регудер. Так, что тут у нас еще есть? Ладно. Это туплики. Ага, вот это видите. Да, Трезвян. Дуз. Доза этюдов? Нет, доза этюдов. ими так и есть, потому что исполнители так и работают, ну, такие показательные, ты как думаешь? Ну, МПС первый просто, ну, МПС так говорят, ну, разве не так, я ошибся, да? Да, ну ладно, да, понимаете, да. Ну, за деньги трудно, да, человеческая рутина, да, вот как сказал, слушай. наоборот. Да, понял. Да, запрещай говорить это, да. Так все так могут, да. А сейчас горит уже все, сгорит. Горит это? Я еще не ел даже сегодня ничего вроде будет, да, кстати. Так, так, еще лучше. Да, тихо, тихо. Знаете, как бы, и что это значит? Тренированный. Больше заниматься этим за деньги. Либо на это переходить на эти рейсы вообще полностью. Да. Рейсы, шмейсы, какая нахер разница? Медитеррейниан, да. А, ну да. Ты врач. Так. Наоборот. Наоборот, значит, да. Куна какая-то контора такая интересная, хорошая. Ну, я надо знать. Наоборот, значит. Наоборот, значит, да. Ах, какой сидит. Эй, иди. На, куда-то. Не хочу, блин, ничего. Нет. Ну что? Да. А, ну да. Нет, никто не самое, ну хорошо. Ладно, наоборот, не знаю. Киев. Харью. Другое отделение же где-то. Ага, харбист, турбист. Вот это он, да. Можно. Ой-ой-ой, нет, не было.
What's up guys, Jay here, and I'm going to bring you a video that I've been asked about recently, more so as time goes on, as rumors start to emerge about Intel's new Rocket Lake CPU coming out, well, anytime now technically. Fun fact, it was supposed to come out in March, and then they announced it in January, but boards aren't even made yet, but whatever. I digress. We're going to talk about whether or not it's worth trying to get, whether or not it's going to be more powerful than Ryzen, or just some general buying advice on something we know nothing about. We interrupt this video to bring you a special message from iFixit. No, we interrupt this interruption with this interruption. That means stuff from iFixit. We should have card, but inventory sucks. Fix the inventory problems with iFixit. Whoa, don't drop it. Can't fix that with iFixit. Just kidding, yes you can. Wish you could take iFixit with you, but your pockets aren't big enough. Introducing you, Lori. And the new Nina. Take them with you anywhere. So get iFixit for your loved one, or just get them for yourself. So we already did a video talking about what Intel actually showed at CE. What a weird thing to say, 2021. That sounds so futuristic even for today. Anyway, starting to emerge. And it's one of those things that it's kind of funny. I said in the intro of this video that it was supposed to come out in March. And a lot of people who are not authorized to comment, but you know, off the record, have told me that this was supposed to be something announced in March to come out a little bit later. But it's pretty obvious that Intel's been feeling the heat from Ryzen, and AMD's, obviously, they're popular routes. So they had to pull it in. And by pulling in the announcement to January, that puts it ahead of any of the board manufacturers being ready to actually deliver on the new Z590 chipset. Yes, the Z590 chipset, to take advantage of the new Rocket Lake stuff. I don't know a whole lot necessarily about the node yet, and the reason for that is that last year we saw some mentions in an email to us from Intel saying that it was going to be 10 nanometer ported back to 14. I know I've mentioned that more than once. I don't know what that means. Whether it's going to be an actual 10 nanometer, which is kind of interesting because their new Celeron and Pentium CPUs, which are announced for notebooks, are on 10 nanometer. You can expect to see some desktop 10 nanometer stuff come. But one of the things that you have to realize is that the 10th gen 10900K, or now dubbed the 10850K because the 10900K yields are extremely low, to be able to get that 5.3 gigahertz boost on single core or TVB, it's one of those things where the yields were really low, so they actually came out with the 10850K, which was 100 megahertz slower and a little bit more plentiful for roughly the same price. So it has a clock speed advantage over Ryzen, but Ryzen has a fairly significant IPC advantage over 10th gen because of its constant shrinking process. AMD is doing a phenomenal job of getting their IPC to improve, but they're still lacking a few hundred megahertz on their high-end CPUs versus the Intel stuff. Now, one thing to keep in mind with Ryzen is for the first time on 4000 series CPUs, or excuse me, 5000 series CPUs, the higher the SKU goes, the actual faster it gets. Where before, the more cores you had on Ryzen, they had to slow it down to increase stability. However, with 5000 series CPU, that wasn't the case. They were actually able to give you about a 100 megahertz increase on every tier you went up. So the 5950X actually had a 4.9 gigahertz single core boost clock versus the Intel's up to 5.3 on the 10900K, or realistically 5.2 on the 10850K.
Also keep in mind that there are other factors in play with Intel, things like the turbo timer essentially, where we'll only run all core boosts for a certain amount of seconds, whereas Ryzen was able to, basically just indefinitely run its all-core boost. But all-core on Intel's flagship CPU of 10th gen was only up to, what, 4.7, 4.8, whereas Ryzen's was significantly lower, up to 4.4, depending on its cooling capabilities. So the reason why I'm telling you all of that is you have to understand kind of where we are today to understand whether or not the next generation is going to be worth it. But this time around on Intel, there's actually a shrink that's taken place, not with the die process, but actually with the amount of cores. Now the 10900K/850K is a 10-core, 20-thread processor that definitely encroached on a lot of their extreme platform processors because those started also at 10 cores, 20 threads for the 10900X. Yeah, 10900K, 10900X, really stupid. One had quad channel, that was, and more PCIe lanes. That was really the only difference to them. But this time, they're going to be dropping down to an 8-core, 16-thread on its top tier part. And now we're starting to see rumors that it might even be as low as a 6-core, 12-thread. So it's one of those things where it's really starting to look like choice is going to be very similar to what it is that we've seen all along. And I've said this in previous videos. I know this sounds like a broken record, although I continue to be asked. You need to keep in mind that although you may be following this stuff day in and day out, and you may breathe and sleep PC tech, there's a lot of new people here that are brand new to this and are very confused with the very poor naming conventions that each brand utilizes, and the fact that we've got overlapping generations that are making things just that much more confusing. Now Ryzen is still going to be your dominant processor when it comes to multitasking. If you can definitely leverage the amount of cores that you're able to take advantage of with Ryzen's mainstream, especially with the 5000 series CPUs and its increased IPC, its increased core clock, the increased cores that you get, because you can get 16-core, 32-thread on mainstream now, which is going to give you 6 cores, 12 threads, or essentially an i5 above the current Intel offering, even that of Rocket Lake. But there's one thing that above the current Rocket Lake. But there's one thing that we're hearing about with Rocket Lake, though, and that is the fact that Intel has apparently pulled about a 10 to 11% IPC improvement clock for clock versus their previous generation. So what you're going to see here is when you do the math, when we do our CPU test, we run a single core locked at 4 gigahertz, that gives you your delta right there. So if you take one versus the other, exactly the same frequency, the Intel tends to get just pretty much on by Ryzen because of Ryzen's amazing IPC improvements over the generation that, or the generations that Ryzen's been around, technically now 4th gen. But Intel this time, apparently, that 10th gen ported to 14 or whatever the hell they were talking about did something, because now that narrows the gap. Ryzen, core for core, when we did the math, when we compared our 10th gen and added 10 to 11% IPC at that locked at 4 clock speed, single core, and added that percentage back to Intel, it still trailed Ryzen, not enough to ever notice, but definitely lower.
Многие боятся встретиться с тигром лицом к лицу.
But it's important to remember that once you remove that artificial limit of 4 gigahertz, the Intel's increased clock speed of now being told is up to 5.3, where they've gotten the yields back where they can single core up to 5.3 reliably, theoretically, because again, 10900K was the same thing, but look, you can't buy one because it turned out it was a lot harder to do than they thought. It's going to make it faster than Ryzen 5000 series once they're allowed to boost up to their normal boost clocks. So that's going to mean whether or not you need to buy Intel or Ryzen is going to definitely depend on what your use case is. And that's going to sound like a broken record because that's realistically all it comes down to. Are you looking at doing live streaming, not offloading the encoder onto your GPU, which a lot of people do with NVIDIA GPUs these days because the NVEC encoder, not offloading the encoder onto your GPU these days because the NVEC encoder is really, really efficient? You lose a little bit of quality, but it's extremely efficient and it takes all the load off your CPU and reduces drop frames and such. Are you going to be doing tasks that utilize Blender or any other 3D modeling that can actually leverage CPU cores that are available to the CPU? Well, I imagine if you're that person, you're probably already offloading it to your GPU as well. So again, that argument starts to not necessarily play in. Do you want to play around with Linux? Do you want to play around with a bunch of VMs or virtual machines? Then the more cores and the more memory, the better. However, if you're looking at just building a kick-ass gaming rig, then Intel's coming back swinging with that IPC improvement, which again is rumored. We have to test it independently on our own, outside of what Intel's rumors are, to determine whether or not you're now going to see that FPS increase come back with Intel. Fun fact, when we tested our RTX 3090 at stock speeds with a stock clocked 10900K, this is a stock clocked 5900X, not a 5950, but a 5900X, which is even 100 megahertz slower than a 5950, we saw that the RTX 3090 was, on average, faster at 1080p gaming on the Ryzen platform than on our Intel platform. So it's one of those things where, for most of 2020, our recommendations always were, if you're building a computer, period, AMD and Ryzen were going to be the better buy. You have to think about here. One, memory speeds. We're starting to see a lot of games really do like to utilize fast memory. Ryzen, however, is still going to be a bit limited by the capabilities of the Infinity Fabric. Remember, the CPU chiplets on Ryzen are essentially two different CCXs which have the physical cores on them that are interlinked through something called the Infinity Fabric, and that takes place by utilizing memory. And the memory speed with the Infinity Fabric is going to limit how fast those CPUs communicate with each other. Now, they've definitely improved the latency between them. That's one of the reasons why we saw such a huge performance uptick with 5th gen, it's not 5th gen, 5000 series. However, we're still seeing a 2x Infinity Fabric speed of memory ratio. So what that means is if you're running a 4000 memory, then you would need to run a 2000 clock speed on the Infinity Fabric. The problem in 100 has proved to be extremely difficult, artificially limiting how fast the memory is that you can actually put on Ryzen. Whereas Intel is still, as long as the memory controller and the CPU can handle it, XMP profiles of up to 5000 megahertz have been achieved. I don't have a CPU that can technically do it, although I do have 5100 megahertz modules. I can't run it. My 10Ks that I have just are not capable of running memory that fast, even though I try and tune the memory controller as much as possible. So there is still a silicon lottery there when it comes to how fast your memory can be, but you are going to get faster memory on Intel this time around as well. And thus, AMD can start to get its Infinity Fabric and the way that the modules are tuned to start going faster. You're seeing an artificial limit right around 3800, which is 1900 times 2. But Ryzen's efficiency has gotten better in that it starts to look like a diminishing return, anything above 3000 megahertz anyway, and task for task, 3000 megahertz on AMD and 4000 megahertz or above on Intel really starts diminishing returns, and you're not getting any sort of benefit to that. So right now, based on the current rumors, and hypothetically a scenario where you could just go out and buy either of these two CPUs, because you can imagine that the Intel stuff when it's launched is going to be sold out immediately as well, is going to be the old recommendation. If what they say is true, if you want to build the best gaming rig that you possibly can, then Intel's really starting to look like it's going to have that edge with its superior clock speed and a caught up or matched IPC to Ryzen. Our math shows it's still going to be a couple of percent behind the AMD CPUs. However, the clock speeds are definitely going to give the advantage back to Intel when it comes to gaming performance. And obviously we'll be testing that when it comes out. Who knows when that's going to be? We're probably still a month or two away from getting you reviews on any of this stuff when it comes out. So if you have any specific questions on either of these two platforms that you think we should answer during our review, comment down below what you'd like to see us test. What do you guys look for when you're building your computers? Strictly gaming machine, all around, work/game? Are you doing content creation? Are you doing professional workflows? You guys' use case, try and better incorporate these types of use cases into our reviews. So there's my talking head on these two. I hope that gives you something to think about. If you're building a gaming machine, you're going to want to definitely sign up for notifications when this stuff starts to go live, because just like anything else last year, the shortages this year are going to continue, considering we have a worldwide microchip shortage, which right now is giving all prioritization to the automotive industry, because remember, they all have computers in there too now. And so us lowly PC people are kind of being left out while the automotive industry is also struggling, waiting on the SoC. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, we will see you in the next one. And don't forget about our giveaway. You'll hear about it right here. Hey you, before you click off this video, you may or may not be aware, I'm actually doing a worldwide graphics card giveaway where one winner will get to choose either a 6800 XT Merc 319 card from XFX or a 2080 Ti MSI Gaming X Trio from Team NVIDIA. So if you're sitting there right now going, I didn't know about this, how do I enter? Follow the description down below. You guys will find a link to the giveaway video that will give you all the details. Don't wait, because it really sucks to find out about these after they're over. So PC popularity is at its highest, I feel, that it's ever been.
The cadenza is total genius. It starts with, you remember at the very beginning of the piece that we had 1, 4, 5, and 4 was this? So the cadenza starts with that chord. This should be played with a combination of holding the pedal, but also a very legato touch to make the whole thing feel connected from here to there. We have a very beautiful resolution here. Make sure that the B that you play twice is firstly a melodic one, and then here is an accompaniment sound, and then it's all atmosphere. Start as slowly as you like. Take as long as you want, and play as many of these as you want. This is one of those runs that if you prefer to find some way of dividing it, that's completely up to you. I happen to learn it without doing that. There we are again with the 4 chord. A little bit of chromatic noodling. Here's a change that Grieg wanted. That note. And this is all about voicing. That we make sure we have this line. This is the kind of legato where you really are transferring the weight from note to note, almost overlapping, and this has to be very underneath the G sharp. At this point, I happen to like to take this note over with the left hand so that I have total control over how soft that final A is going to be.
So that's the introduction to the cadenza, the beginning of it. And now here's where we get to tune. Basically, the outline of what you're doing is this. Very obviously comes from this. You want it to be slower, you want it to be atmospheric, and you want to play, of course, all the notes that Grieg gave you, which are these. There's a kind of ideal, which is that this is constant while you're doing this. And I honestly don't think it's very important. I think it's important that it's there whenever you can. There's enough sound from here that if this briefly drops out while you're distracted playing, you are hearing the color that you want to hear. The pedaling only works if they carry you through each half measure. And it's for the first few measures of this, that you avoid the temptation to get too worked up. Now, once you get to that point of hitting the C sharp, and you've introduced the A7 chord, the music really starts to open up. And let that happen. And at this point, it's clearly built up to a big moment. Your left hand stops playing, which is great because you can put all your focus into these chords. And then both hands are playing chords. This is not a particularly difficult octave passage if you think of it in terms of these four notes and these four notes. The only thing is you have to remember when that pattern stops, and it goes chromatic. If you hold down the pedal for certain parts of that passage, you're going to get a tremendous amount of sound generated, and you definitely want that. And it's fine if there's blur at that point. I'm putting the pedal down and I'm only doing a half change on the fourth beat. And even when I get to that A, I only do a half change because I actually want a little bit of that thunder to still be in that note. We should perceive it as an A, but it doesn't need to be that clean. So here we are with an exploded version of this theme. An absolutely massive statement, which of course can be slower as well as bigger and louder. And then we have this, which basically provides this extra rumble. So there's a real sense of thunderstorm kind of writing in the music. And we get this and it continues. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Grieg wrote all of this as arpeggios where the right hand and left hand alternate playing four notes each, like this. 4 notes, 4 notes, 4 notes, 4 notes, and 4 notes. And Percy Grainger made a suggestion, which was that it would be a lot more powerful if there was a kind of a martellato effect with the hands to do it like this, with whatever finger you like. is in fact a lot louder, and it's very effective. But I feel like if you do that for every one of those chords, you end up with, maybe it's all a little bombastic and we're not quite hearing, because that is the music that we want to hear in this passage. So I came up with my own compromise and my own combination of these two ideas. So I play the first two chords the way Grieg wrote them, with the 4-note groups. That one and this one. And then on this one, which is twice as long, I do the Percy Grainger arrangement. And I'm basically doing 5-2 in the right hand and 1-2 in the left hand. And it's fabulous. It's really, really, really strong. So I have a combination of, and notice how for that last one, I'm dropping the sound a lot so there's room to make a crescendo. Here. Like this. So that's the way that I would approach this. And then the same for the next one. Do those like this. And then do this one. And then I think all of these can be done in the Grainger arrangement. Now here, the indication that Grieg made, and also appears in this Schirmer edition, is to catch that G sharp silently. So you've played this very broad triplets. Catch it silently, let go of the pedal, so we can still hear it connect to this. Same thing, and again. So that way we really hear, that very clearly connecting all the way through. And again, the pedal's down, capture it silently, and let go of the pedal, and you should still be able to hear it, especially if I'm not talking and waiting to do it. Now here's that great harmony. It's that harmony combined again with this pedal note, and that becomes this very beautiful harmony, which this is the one moment that I think Grieg was even anticipating Impressionist writing when you hear this. And I try to do that. I try to let it almost like the kind of thing you would hear in Jadot of Ravel, try to have a flourish to the high note. This, and then just very soft on the way down, and then you emerge from that with the trills. Now we have this last gasp of the theme, but because your right hand is busy with the trill, there's one awkward chord in there, which is this one. That's awkward to play for almost everybody, and of course if your hand doesn't stretch that far, it's impossible to play. You can take that D with the right hand. And that's no problem at all. Do this for strength. Be as dramatic as you want here. Hold it as long as you need to. And here you want to get to the point. You want to start this so that you can hear them individually. You want to speed it up to the point that it becomes just a color. And anything that works is fair game. I find that I hand fairly with a little bit of tension, and I find I don't need as much down here. I keep this arm low, this arm high, so that I can kind of mentally picture my arms going at it and not really think about the fingers at all. And then your right hand thumb moves down one note. And the whole time this is happening, you are not beholden to anything to do with your accompanist or with the conductor. All of this that happens in the cadenza is your freedom to be expressive in any way that feels appropriate to you. At this final moment, you then finally need to be clear. There, the orchestra's coming in, and they're making a very last atmospheric statement of this. And then you come in changing everything because the orchestra then moves to a polka più allegro, and you feel a little bit of the energy that we had in the beginning. And he ends the first movement in a very similar way to how he started it, with this same alternating of tonic and dominant. So it's basically, it's just 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 1. That's all it is for the entire end of the movement. And this is exactly like the opening, except it's written without so many pauses throughout. And yes, of course you're going to play that penultimate note with a low octave. Gives a little bit more sonority, and it makes for a very satisfying conclusion to this brilliant first movement. Hello, I'm John Kimura Parker, and I'm here with you on Tone Bass to talk about the Grieg Piano Concerto. And when I say the Grieg Piano Concerto,
Нет, да ладно. Так. Опа. А, чем меньше, тем да. То есть, кто будет, ну хорошо. Ну так вот и скажешь тогда, значит. Маратович. Так нет, дорогие. Нет, играть надо просто. Да что тогда делать надо? Пить надо сюда. трясет. Что-то неожиданное, интересно сам, да. Да. Так очень выражает, да. Значит, плохо ты не знаешь, значит, хреново. Я запросто делаю вообще. Ну да. И ну, по-всякому, да. Ну, наоборот, значит, да. За меня не волнует, что ты мне хочешь. Плохих пианистов. Я тебе говорю про пианистов, которые... Да наоборот, если вперед кажется, еще наоборот, да, просто понял. Просто быстро надо смотреть, быстрее надо подходить, да? Да. Ну, наоборот, да. Так. Ну, не играй только, ладно. Сокращенную версию играю где-то, да. Ты жизнь прожил, блин, и не сыграл ни что-нибудь там, да, или еще что-нибудь сделал. Ну не смотри. когда это декотируется, что это верно, ладно? Ладно, понял, что... Ладно, потому разница. Хорошо делать это гейство, понимаешь? Согласен ты, да? Слишком вылизан, да. Да. То есть вылизан это бабство, по сути. А вот новости, она всегда рубленная. Ну, он тебя понял, да. Ну да, я тоже так считаю. Ну да, вот поэтому, и, наверное, вот поэтому такая ситуация и сложилась. Это тебя не касается, ну нет, это вариант ГУБАЕВ можно начать? Опять зачем 20? Это одно и то же, блин. Одно и то же. Блин.
Хорошо, все, что точнее. Коде идет. becomes interesting.
Наоборот, да. Наоборот, просто, да, не понятно. Круто. Да. Ну нет, да, это тоже так, это объяснил сама. И что дальше? Нет, просто, ну вот, так. Не знаю. Наверное, да. Ладно. Хорошо, дальше. Где я просто? Ну, сейчас. Да, как-то так разделить, что ли, тут АБЦ, короче, 3 раза. я не ожидал даже, что это за подложка такая вообще просто. Ты оборзел, что ли? Ты что такое вообще? Ну, вот я понял уже. Ничего лучшего и не ожидал, говорит. Просто не знаешь. Ну, наоборот, да наоборот. Ну, наоборот, это типа этого себе так думаю. Да нет, ну и что не надо. Наоборот, ну, себя, ну ладно. Не буду понимать. Наоборот.
Нет, наоборот, наоборот, да. Наоборот, наоборот, да наоборот, да, если хочешь, наоборот, нет, наоборот, а, ну нет, наоборот, да наоборот, да наоборот, да наоборот. Нет, они просто работают. А чё, какой смысл-то, я не понимаю, а чё так?
То, что владельцы данного аппарата готов...
Ну вот это есть на самом деле. Что такое? Ну наоборот, да нет, наоборот, наоборот, кодек у тебя там просто, да нет, поменялся кодек, да наоборот, да наоборот, что такое, я понять не могу. Что тебе надо-то? Не на себе так он думает. Нет, не надо играть. А, ну нет, наоборот.